Jonas Cole had never imagined his life would change in a single moment. He was just a regular human diplomat, sent to a remote planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy to negotiate peace with the galaxy's deadliest species, the Thraxians. These creatures were feared across every known world for their violent conquests, leaving nothing but destruction behind them. No one had ever dared challenge them, and no one ever imagined that a peaceful diplomat like Jonas would start a war with them. Jonas had been briefed on the importance of this mission. The human race had been in a tense standoff with the Thraxians for years, but the galaxy's leaders hoped that a diplomatic solution could ease the pressure. But as Jonas sat across from the massive Thraxian emperor, a towering figure whose skin shimmered with dark scales, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Every inch of the emperor's throne room seemed designed to intimidate. He had read about the Thraxians and heard stories about their cruelty. But as Jonas looked into the emperor's glowing yellow eyes, all he could think of was how to get through this meeting. He had to say the right words. He had to make them see reason. The pressure was unbearable. "Your species has always been known for your strength," Jonas began, trying to sound confident. "But strength alone doesn't guarantee survival. There's more to peace than just the ability to destroy." The words were meant to be a compliment. He wanted to praise the Thraxians' power, but also encourage them to consider a peaceful future. However, he didn't realize how his words would be taken. The Thraxian emperor's eyes narrowed, his expression turning cold. There was a long silence. The air in the room thickened, and Jonas began to feel the weight of his mistake. "You dare to speak of peace?" The emperor's voice rumbled, like the sound of thunder. "You call us destroyers, and yet you mock our power." Jonas' stomach dropped. He hadn't meant it like that at all. He tried to explain, to apologize, but the damage was already done. The emperor stood, his massive form towering over the diplomat. "You have made a grave error, human," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "You have declared war on the Thraxian Empire." Jonas froze, his heart racing. The emperor's words rang out like a death sentence, a war. He had no intention of declaring war. He had only wanted peace, but now it was too late to take back the words. Before Jonas could say another word, the Thraxian emperor raised his hand. "The galaxy shall tremble before us. War begins today." Jonas was left in stunned silence. He had just done what no human had ever dreamed of. He had unknowingly declared war on the most powerful species in the galaxy, and now there was no turning back. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours of the Thraxian Emperor's declaration of war, humans on Earth and across the colonies were in a state of chaos. Governments scrambled to respond, but no one knew what to do. The Thraxians were a terrifying enemy, and no one had ever believed that humans could stand up to them. Back on Earth, Jonas Cole sat in a small, dimly lit room, his hands shaking as he stared at the holographic screen in front of him. The Earth's leaders were meeting in an emergency session, and Jonas had been called in to explain what had happened. He had no idea what to say. "You've done it now, Jonas," said General Harris, the gruff military leader who was part of the emergency council. He was an imposing figure, tall and strong, with a military uniform decorated with numerous medals. His face was grim, and his voice was cold. "You've just dragged humanity into a war we're not prepared for." Jonas swallowed hard. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't meant it, but the truth was undeniable. He had made a mistake, and now Earth was facing the consequences. The Thraxians had one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. They could wipe out Earth's colonies without even breaking a sweat. "We need a plan," General Harris continued. "And we need it now. We can't sit around and wait for them to strike first." Jonas didn't respond. He was still in shock. He had never wanted any of this. He had come here to bring peace, not destruction. Now, the weight of what he had done was settling in. He felt as though the whole galaxy was turning against him. He had started something that couldn't be undone. A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Admiral Saria, a skilled strategist who had worked with the Earth military for years. "We're not completely powerless," she said. "We might not have the Thraxians' strength, but we have something they don't. Adaptability. We're going to need every human to step up and fight. And we're going to need to make alliances with anyone who will listen." Jonas looked up at her. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination that Jonas hadn't seen in anyone else. The Thraxians were ruthless, but Admiral Saria was right. Humans might not have the sheer power to defeat them, but they had something else, something the Thraxians would never understand. "We need to reach out to our allies," Admiral Saria continued, "and we need to do it quickly. We can't fight this battle alone." Jonas nodded, his mind racing. He wasn't a military strategist, but he could do one thing. He could use his position as a diplomat to seek help from other alien species, species who might also hate the Thraxians. The galaxy was vast, and there were others who might be willing to fight back. As Jonas left the room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had made a mistake, but now he had a chance to fix it. The war wasn't over yet. It hadn't even started. And as much as he feared the Thraxians, he knew one thing for sure. Humans would never back down. Jonas Cole stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over Earth's capital city. The sun had just begun to set, casting a soft orange glow across the skyline. It should have been a peaceful evening, but the weight of the war hung over him like a dark cloud. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he had to fix it. As he stood there, deep in thought, a soft voice interrupted his solitude. It was Vera, a member of an alien race who had contacted Earth years earlier. She was small, her skin shimmering in shades of blue and silver, with eyes that seemed to glow with intelligence. She was not part of the Thraxian Empire, but her species had always kept a cautious distance from the Thraxians. Jonas had met her only once, during a diplomatic mission, and they had exchanged a few words. But now, in the midst of war, she had come to offer help. "I know you must feel responsible, Jonas," Vera said, her voice gentle but firm. "But the galaxy is a vast place. There are other species who share your fear of the Thraxians. You're not alone in this." Jonas turned to face her, his eyes filled with doubt. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted. "I've made a mess of everything. I don't have the experience to lead a war. I'm just a diplomat. I've only ever tried to negotiate peace." Vera stepped closer, her expression filled with understanding. "You may be a diplomat, but you have something that many others do not. The ability to think outside the box. You see things from a human perspective, and that's something the Thraxians won't ever understand. You have a way of bringing people together, even when everything seems hopeless." Jonas listened closely. He knew she was right. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or military tactics. It was in their creativity, their ability to adapt, and their determination to survive. If anyone could find a way out of this, it would be humans. Vera continued, "I've spoken with some of the other alien species who have been oppressed by the Thraxians. They are willing to help, but they need a leader to unite them. They need someone they can trust. That someone is you." Jonas looked at her, feeling the mixture of fear and hope. Could he really be the one to bring the galaxy together? He had never thought of himself as a leader. But in that moment, something inside him shifted. Maybe he didn't have to be a military genius. Maybe all he had to do was believe in humanity's ability to fight for survival. "I'll do it," Jonas said, his voice steady. "I'll unite the galaxy against the Thraxians. But I can't do it alone. I need you, and I need your people." Vera smiled, her eyes glowing brighter. "We will help, Jonas. You're not alone." Together, they began making plans to reach out to the galaxy's oppressed species, to build an alliance strong enough to face the Thraxians head-on. It wouldn't be easy, but Jonas now understood something important. The human spirit could not be crushed. As long as he believed in that, There was hope for the future. The human forces were preparing for battle. The Thraxian fleet was already on its way, massive warships darkening the skies of Earth's outer colonies. It was a terrifying sight, but Jonas Cole wasn't afraid. He had seen humanity's strength in ways that the Thraxians would never understand. The human spirit was unbreakable. They had been pushed to the edge, but they would fight back with everything they had. Jonas stood in a military command room, surrounded by officers and strategists. The room was filled with tension, but there was also something else. Determination. The humans weren't backing down. They were ready to face the Thraxians head-on, no matter how impossible it seemed. Admiral Saria, the human military leader who had been guiding them through the chaos, was speaking to the room. The Thraxians may have the largest fleet, but they have one weakness: their overconfidence, she said, her voice steady. They think we're just a primitive species, easy to crush. But they've underestimated us. Jonas nodded. He had spent hours speaking with Admiral Saria, learning about military tactics and strategy. It wasn't his area of expertise, but he had a different perspective. A human perspective. He knew that humans didn't always fight the way other species did. They didn't rely solely on brute strength or overwhelming numbers. They relied on their creativity, on their ability to adapt quickly, and on their unwavering will to survive. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Jonas said, speaking for the first time in the meeting. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room turned to listen. "The Thraxians think they can wipe us out with a single strike, but they don't understand how we fight. We're not just going to meet them in the open. We're going to use our environment, our agility. Guerrilla tactics. They won't know what hit them." Admiral Saria looked at him thoughtfully. "You're right. The Thraxians are expecting us to fight like them, head-on, with overwhelming force. But we can't match their strength. We need to use their arrogance against them." The plan began to take shape. The human forces would strike quickly and unexpectedly, using the terrain and the environment to their advantage. They would not face the Thraxians directly, but instead harass them, strike from the shadows, and disappear before the enemy could retaliate. It was a risky move, but Jonas was confident. It was the human way of fighting, the way they had survived time and time again. As the days passed, the tension grew. The Thraxians were nearing Earth's colonies, and the clock was ticking. But the human forces didn't flinch. They were ready to fight, and they were ready to win. Jonas stood on the deck of a warship, looking out at the stars. The Thraxian fleet was coming, but Jonas felt a sense of calm. He knew that humanity had something the Thraxians didn't, a spirit that could not be crushed. The Thraxians were powerful, but they didn't understand the human will to survive. "We may not have their power," Jonas said softly to himself, "but we have something better. We have each other." As the fleet prepared for battle, Jonas looked around at the brave men and women who were about to face the Thraxians. They were ready. They were human. And no matter what happened, they would never give up. The war had only just begun, and already Jonas Cole felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The first few skirmishes with the Thraxian fleet had gone better than expected, thanks to the humans' unexpected guerrilla tactics, but everyone knew that the Thraxians were far from defeated. They were powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they had crushed humanity once and for all. Jonas stood in the war room, the flickering lights overhead casting long shadows across the walls. He wasn't alone. Admiral Saria was at the command table, along with a few of Earth's top military leaders. But this time, the room felt different. There was an air of cautious hope, hope that had not been there before. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but something had changed. The humans had shown they were not easily beaten. And now, they had allies. Vera, the alien woman who had first offered her help, was standing near the corner of the room, talking to an older man with gray skin and bright purple eyes. He was from the Xinthar, a species known for their advanced technology and long-standing hatred of the Thraxians. The Xinthar had been at war with the Thraxians for centuries, but had never been strong enough to win. Until now. Jonas, Vera said, walking toward him. This is Elder Varn, leader of the Scifi. His people have fought the Thraxians for as long as anyone can remember. They have the knowledge, the technology, and the will to see this war through to the end. But they need leadership. They need you. Jonas looked at Elder Varn, who gave him a nod of respect. The Xinthar were known for their wisdom and battle strategies, and to have them on their side was a huge advantage. But Jonas wasn't sure he was the leader they needed. He was just a diplomat after all. But Vera was right. He couldn't do this alone. "I'll do what I can," Jonas said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty he felt inside. "We all need to work together. If we're going to stop the Thraxians, we need a united front. Our differences don't matter right now. All that matters is that we survive." Elder Varn smiled. "We agree. Our people have long known that the Thraxians were a threat to the entire galaxy, but we could not defeat them on our own. Together, we have a chance." The humans, the Xinthar, and a few other alien species began to form a plan. The Thraxians were still advancing, but now they faced a united galaxy. The alliance, though fragile, was stronger than anything Jonas had expected. And while there was still a lot of work to do, he felt a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. For the first time since the war had begun, Jonas believed that victory was possible. But he knew the Thraxians weren't going to give up easily. They would strike back with everything they had, and the cost of war would be high. Still, as he looked around at his new allies, Jonas realized one important thing. Humanity wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in a long time, the Thraxians were the ones who were outnumbered. The days leading up to the Thraxian counterattack were filled with tension. Jonas could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The Thraxians had suffered their first real defeat at the hands of humanity and its new allies, but they were far from finished. Everyone knew that their enemy would retaliate, and with brutal force. The alliance that Jonas had helped create wasn't fully prepared for what was coming. Even with the combined strength of humans, the Xinthar, and the other alien species, the Thraxians were still an overwhelming force. But one thing was certain: they would not go down without a fight. Jonas sat in the war room, surrounded by the leaders of the alliance. The holographic map in front of him flickered, showing the movements of the Thraxian fleet as it drew closer to Earth's colonies. The Thraxians had sent their best ships, their most skilled warriors, and their most powerful weapons. They were coming for revenge. "Prepare yourselves," Admiral Saria said, her voice calm but firm. "We may not have the numbers, but we have something the Thraxians don't: the element of surprise." Jonas nodded. The human forces, together with their new allies, had already launched several small but effective strikes against the Thraxians. Guerrilla tactics had worked once, and they would work again. The Thraxians couldn't predict what the humans would do next. They were unpredictable, relentless, and determined to win. Suddenly, the room went quiet as a new message came through. A warning from the Thraxian fleet. "Commander Jonas Cole," the voice on the screen said, "your rebellion ends now. Prepare for your final destruction." Jonas's heart skipped a beat. The Thraxians weren't just threatening. They were coming to destroy everything. "This is it," Jonas whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The stakes had never been higher. They had one chance to stop the Thraxians, and if they failed, the cost would be unimaginable. Admiral Saria stood up, her eyes sharp. "We will not fail. This is our home, our people. We will fight to the end." The battle began with a deafening roar as the Thraxian fleet entered Earth's orbit. The first wave of attacks came quickly, overwhelming the human defenses at first. The Thraxians unleashed their devastating weapons, tearing apart the outer colonies in an instant. Ships exploded in fiery flashes of light, and the shockwaves reached even Earth's surface, rattling the ground beneath their feet. Jonas and his team had anticipated this. The first wave was meant to test the defenses, to get the humans and their allies to react. But the Thraxians didn't realize just how resilient humans were. The Alliance had already set up a series of hidden strongholds and defense stations. As the Thraxians advanced, they were met with an unexpected counterattack. Human ships, small and fast, darted through the chaos, attacking the Thraxian ships from unexpected angles. The Scifi, with their advanced technology, launched precision strikes that crippled the enemy's main weapons. The other alien species, each with their own unique abilities, worked together like a well-oiled machine, hitting the Thraxians where it hurt most. It wasn't an easy fight. There were losses, too many for Jonas to bear, but the Thraxians were forced to retreat, their fleet scattered and broken. They had underestimated the humans and their allies. As the dust settled and the stars above Earth's colonies began to calm, Jonas let out a long breath. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the war had begun, he'd allowed himself a moment of hope. The Thraxians were wounded, but they were not defeated. The war was still raging, but the humans had proven something. They could hold their ground. Jonas looked out over the holographic map again. This fight wasn't over, but the tide had begun to turn. The Thraxian retreat had been a victory, but Jonas Cole knew better than to celebrate. It was only a temporary pause in a war that was far from over. The Thraxians would regroup, and they would come back even stronger. The galaxy was still hanging on a knife's edge, and humanity's fight for survival was just beginning. Jonas was standing in the war room again, his eyes scanning the map of the galaxy. The Thraxian fleet had been pushed back, but they weren't finished. They had powerful weapons, too powerful. Jonas had heard rumors of a secret weapon, something so dangerous that it could end the war in one strike. But no one knew where it was or what it looked like. The Thraxians had hidden it well. Admiral Seria was leaning over the table, studying the map as well. "We've pushed them back for now, but we know they're hiding something," she said. "They have a secret weapon, and we need to find it before they use it against us." Jonas nodded. "The sooner we find it, the better. We can't afford to wait until it's too late." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. The Alliance had come together, but they were still no match for the Thraxian Empire in terms of sheer power. The only way to win this war was to find the Thraxians' hidden weapon and destroy it before they could unleash it on the galaxy. Just then, Vera walked in, her expression serious. She had been working with the Scifi to gather intelligence on the Thraxian forces, and Jonas could tell that something important was on her mind. "I found something," she said, her voice low. "The Thraxians are hiding their weapon on a remote planet. It's a place no one has dared to go, a deadly, uncharted world in the Outer Rim. I've been tracking their movements, and they've been sending supplies there. Whatever they're building, it's almost ready." Jonas felt his heart race. The planet Vera was talking about was one of the most dangerous in the galaxy. It was home to deadly storms, massive predators, and unstable terrain. No one had ever survived there long enough to map it properly. If the Thraxians had hidden their weapon there, it would be a nearly impossible task to find it, let alone destroy it. "We can't waste any time," Jonas said, his voice determined. "We need to get to that planet, no matter the cost." Vera nodded. "I'll gather a team of the best scouts and pilots. We'll need to move fast and quietly. The Thraxians can't know we're coming." The plan was set. A small team of humans, Scifi, and other alien allies would travel to the dangerous planet and search for the weapon. Jonas would lead the team himself. It was a risky mission, and the odds were against them. But Jonas knew they didn't have a choice. If they didn't act now, the Thraxians could use their weapon to destroy everything. As Jonas stood with Vera, looking over the plan, he felt a surge of determination. The war was far from over, but they had a chance to turn the tide in their favor. They weren't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. "We'll find it," Jonas said, his voice steady. "And we'll destroy it. For Earth. For all of us." The mission would begin soon, and Jonas couldn't afford to hesitate. The galaxy's fate rested on his shoulders, and he wouldn't let the Thraxians win. Not while humanity still had a fighting chance. The mission to the remote, dangerous planet was underway. Jonas Cole stood at the command center of the ship, his heart pounding as the crew prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. They had no idea what awaited them on the planet, but they had no choice. The Thraxian weapon had to be destroyed before it could be used against them. Jonas had gathered a small team of soldiers, scouts, and technicians from Earth and their allies. Vera was with them, guiding the team with her knowledge of the Thraxians. The Synthar had provided the best pilots, and they were all ready to face whatever dangers awaited them on the planet. But even with all their preparation, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. The planet they were about to land on had killed everyone who had tried to explore it before. It was a place of storms, predators, and deadly terrain. No one had ever returned. "Everyone, listen up," Admiral Saria said, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere in the command center. "This is going to be dangerous. The Thraxians are well aware of our forces, and we can't risk letting them know we're coming. We need to get in, find their weapon, and get out without being detected. No heroics. This is about survival." Jonas nodded, his resolve hardening. He had led his people through tough situations before, but this was different. If they failed, everything they had fought for, everything humanity had sacrificed, would be lost. The Thraxians would have the power to wipe them all out. There was no room for error. As the ship descended into the thick atmosphere of the planet, the turbulence made everything shake. Jonas felt a sense of dread wash over him. It was like the planet itself was rejecting them. The planet's storms were fierce, with lightning flashing across the sky and wind howling through the ship's hull. But there was no turning back. "Touchdown in 3 minutes," the pilot announced. Jonas's team geared up, checking their weapons and equipment. The tension was thick, and there wasn't much talk. Everyone knew what was at stake. The ship finally touched down, and the team quickly disembarked into the dense jungle. The air was thick and humid, and the sounds of distant predators echoed in the background. It was a harsh, unforgiving world, and Jonas knew that the Thraxians had chosen it for a reason. The planet was nearly impossible to navigate, and it would take everything they had just to survive long enough to find the weapon. "We move fast, and we move quiet," Jonas said, looking at his team. "Stay close, stay sharp. We can't afford to make any mistakes." As they made their way through the jungle, the team encountered the first of many dangers. Huge, predatory creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes glowing in the darkness. But the team was focused. They had one goal: find the weapon and destroy it. Hours passed, and the group finally came across what they had been searching for: a hidden Thraxian facility. It was buried deep within the planet's core, concealed by the storms and the terrain. The facility was heavily guarded, but Jonas and his team managed to slip past the patrols undetected. Inside, they found what they had feared: a massive, terrifying weapon. It was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. It looked like a machine capable of destroying entire worlds with a single blast. The weapon was close to being activated. Jonas's team worked quickly, planting explosives and setting up charges to destroy the weapon. But as they finished, the alarm sounded. They had been detected. The Thraxians were coming. "We don't have much time," Jonas shouted as the first Thraxian soldiers appeared in the doorway. "Get out. Now." The team sprinted through the facility, but the Thraxians were relentless. Jonas and his team fought back, using everything they had to hold off the enemy long enough to escape. The countdown to the weapon's destruction was ticking. As they reached the ship, the final explosion went off, shaking the ground beneath them. The weapon was destroyed. The Thraxians had lost their edge. The ship took off, blasting through the atmosphere as the Thraxian forces scrambled below. Jonas looked out the window, breathing a sigh of relief. They had done it. They had struck a blow to the Thraxian Empire that they couldn't recover from. As the ship sailed into the stars, Jonas realized something. This wasn't just a victory for humanity. It was a victory for the entire galaxy. Together, they had stood against the most powerful force in the universe, and they had won. The battle had been fierce, and the war was far from over, but the destruction of the Thraxian weapon had shifted the balance. Jonas Cole and his team had struck a blow that the Thraxians would not easily recover from. The weapon, capable of destroying entire worlds, was now nothing but ruins on a distant planet, and with it, the Thraxians had lost their advantage. Back on Earth, the mood had changed. After months of uncertainty and fear, humanity, and their allies, finally had something to celebrate. The Thraxians were still powerful, but they were no longer unbeatable. And the alliance between the humans, Synthar, and other species had become stronger. They were united, determined to see the war through to the end. Jonas sat in the war room, his mind racing. He had come a long way since that first disastrous meeting with the Thraxian Emperor. He was no longer just a diplomat. He had become a leader, a symbol of humanity's resilience. But now, with the Thraxians weakening, Jonas knew the hardest part of the war was still ahead. The Thraxian Empire wouldn't give up easily. They would fight to the last. "How's the situation on the front lines?" Jonas asked, looking at the holographic map that showed the positions of both human and Thraxian forces. Admiral Seria was at the table, studying the map closely. "The Thraxians have been forced into a defensive position, but they're not retreating completely. They're regrouping, rebuilding their forces. They'll come at us again, probably harder this time." Jonas nodded. He had known that the Thraxians would strike back with everything they had. But he had confidence now, confidence that they could hold their ground. With the weapon gone, their chances had increased. The war was no longer about surviving. It was about winning. "We need to keep the pressure on them," Jonas said, his voice steady. "We can't let them regroup. If we give them time to rebuild, they'll come back stronger." The plan was simple, but dangerous. The Alliance would launch a series of coordinated attacks on the Thraxian strongholds, focusing on their supply lines and military bases. They would hit fast, hit hard, and keep the Thraxians on the defensive. It would be the final push they needed to break the Thraxian Empire for good. As the days passed, the Alliance mobilized. Ships were readied, troops were prepared, and the air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew the stakes. This wasn't just about a single battle. It was about ending the war once and for all. It was humanity's chance to prove that they belonged in the galaxy, that they weren't just another species to be crushed under the heel of the Thraxians. Jonas stood at the command center, looking out at the fleet. It was a beautiful sight. Ships of every size and shape, all flying in perfect formation. The humans, the Synthar, and the other species were united, ready to fight together. For the first time in a long while, Jonas felt hope. The first wave of attacks began, and the Thraxians fought back with everything they had. The battles were brutal, and the losses were heavy. But the humans had learned from their mistakes. They used their speed, their creativity, and their determination to keep the Thraxians off balance. Every strike was carefully planned, and every move was executed with precision. As the days turned into weeks, the tide of the war began to shift. The Thraxians, once so powerful and certain of victory, were now struggling. Their fleet was in disarray, their forces scattered, and their strongholds crumbling under the weight of the human-led alliance. The Thraxian Empire was beginning to fracture, and the galaxy was finally seeing the first signs of hope in years. Jonas knew the war wasn't over yet. There were still battles to fight, still obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, he could see the end in sight. And as the Alliance pressed forward, he knew that humanity would stand tall, no matter what. The war was finally over. After months of brutal fighting, the Thraxian Empire had fallen. Their fleet had been shattered, their strongholds destroyed, and their leaders captured or scattered. The galaxy had been forever changed, and humanity had proven that they were not to be underestimated. Jonas Cole stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out over the horizon. The sky was clear, the stars shining brightly in the distance. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, the future of humanity had been in jeopardy. Now, there was peace, real peace. The war had taken its toll. Many lives had been lost on both sides, and the cost had been heavy. But humanity had endured. They had faced the deadliest species in the galaxy and emerged victorious. Jonas couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for himself, but for everyone who had fought. The bravery of the humans, the Xanthar, and the other species who had joined the fight was something that would be remembered for generations. Admiral Saria walked up beside him, her face tired but relieved. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. "The Thraxians are finished." Jonas nodded. "We did, but it wasn't just about defeating them. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity can stand with the strongest, that we're more than just survivors. We're leaders now." They both stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the victory sink in. The war had been a brutal, exhausting journey, but it had united the galaxy in a way nothing else could. Humans, once seen as weak and primitive, had earned the respect of every species in the galaxy. Vera, who had been by Jonas's side throughout the war, joined them on the balcony. Her eyes glowed softly in the fading light. "The galaxy has changed," she said. "The Thraxians are gone, but there's a new order now. The alliances we formed, the friendships, they'll last." Jonas smiled at her. "It's not just about the war anymore, is it?" "No," she agreed. "Now it's about building something new. A galaxy where peace isn't just a dream, but a reality." As the days passed, Earth and its allies began the process of rebuilding. The human race, once isolated and struggling to survive, was now a key player in the galaxy. New alliances were formed, and the cooperation between species that had once seemed impossible was now a reality. The Thraxian threat was gone, but a new challenge awaited them: how to ensure that this peace would last. Jonas knew that the work wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt confident that humanity could handle them. They had faced the impossible and come out on top. They had shown that no matter the odds, humans would always find a way to fight back, to adapt, and to survive. Standing on the balcony, Jonas looked out at the stars once more. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had changed with it. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had earned its place among the stars. And for the first time, they were ready to face whatever came next, together.